Beth and Rip's story is taking a turn no one saw coming, and the very first episode of their highly anticipated Yellowstone sequel might just shock the entire fandom. Leaving Montana isn't just a change of scenery, it's the breaking of a tradition, the uprooting of a legacy, and perhaps even the beginning of the end for everything the Duttons stood for. Fans expected chaos, drama, and heartbreak, but what we didn't expect was that the very foundation of Yellowstone, the Montana land itself, would be left behind in Episode 1. So, why is Sheridan pushing Beth and Rip out of the only place they've ever belonged? And what secrets are waiting for them in their new home? Let's dive deep, because the answers might be more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. From the moment the Yellowstone spinoff was announced, the biggest question has been how it would set itself apart from the main show. Now, with filming halfway done in Texas, all signs point to Episode 1 making the boldest move possible, showing Beth and Rip leave Montana. At first, that decision feels almost impossible to accept. After all, Montana is more than just a backdrop. It's the very heart of the Yellowstone universe. The sweeping valleys, the iconic ranch, the weight of John Dutton's legacy, it all lives in Montana. To rip Beth and Rip away from that is like cutting away their souls. And yet, Sheridan has never been afraid to upset his audience. In fact, he thrives on it. Just like when he killed off beloved characters in the past or flipped family dynamics upside down, this new spin-off is Sheridan telling us once again, don't get too comfortable. Everything you thought was safe is about to be tested. Episode 1 seems ready to establish this new reality from the very beginning. Early reports from casting calls in Texas mention child actors and prisoners, hinting at a storyline tied to law, punishment, and maybe even redemption. Now, combine that with the fact that Beth and Rip are leaving Montana, and suddenly the pieces start to come together. Could Beth's long-hidden crimes finally catch up with her? Could the state of Montana itself become too dangerous for them to stay? Fans have already whispered about the possibility of Beth facing justice for Jamie's death, and Episode 1 might set the stage by showing why Montana can no longer protect her. If Sheridan really wanted to send shockwaves through the fandom, opening the series with Beth forced to walk away from her father's land would be the ultimate power move. But leaving Montana doesn't mean leaving the drama behind. In fact, it might create even more tension. Rip and Beth stepping into Texas, or wherever the new setting is revealed to be, means they're outsiders for the first time. For years, the Dutton name carried weight, power, and fear. No one dared to cross John's children without consequence. But outside of Montana, that power disappears. Rip, once the enforcer, might find himself challenged by men who don't care about his reputation. Beth, who built her life around being untouchable, might realize that her sharp tongue and iron will aren't enough when she's on unfamiliar soil. The entire dynamic shifts, and in Episode 1, we might see them face humiliation, resistance, and even betrayal from the very people they thought they could trust. And then there's the question of why Sheridan chose Texas for filming. Fans have been divided over this since day one. On one hand, Texas is cheaper and more practical for production. On the other, it feels like a betrayal to everything Yellowstone represents. But Sheridan is too clever to make this a simple cost-cutting move. If Episode 1 is filmed in Texas, it's because Texas itself is part of the story. Remember, Annette Bening is joining the cast as Bula Jackson, a Texas ranch owner described as cunning, powerful, and charming. That's not a coincidence. That's Sheridan laying the groundwork for a new kind of conflict. Episode 1 might show Beth and Rip entering Bula's world either as uneasy allies or bitter rivals. And if history has taught us anything, it's that Beth doesn't share power easily. The clash between Beth and Bula could be the central tension of the entire series, and Episode 1 is where that fire will be lit. But what about Rip? Fans love him as the silent, loyal protector, but in Episode 1, we might see him face a challenge unlike anything before. Enter Ed Harris as Everett McKini, the seasoned veteran and veterinarian. On the surface, he sounds like an ordinary addition, but no one hires Ed Harris to play ordinary. His very presence screams importance. Episode 1 could easily establish him as the man who immediately questions Rip's authority. Imagine Rip arriving in this new land, ready to take control, only to be undermined by Everett, a man just as tough, just as dangerous, and far more respected in the local community. That kind of clash would push Rip into unfamiliar territory. And with Beth already fighting her own battles, the couple might find themselves stretched thin from day one. So, what does all this mean for episode 1? It means that leaving Montana isn't just a backdrop change, it's the foundation for an entirely new kind of Yellowstone story. Instead of watching Beth and Rip fight to hold on to a legacy, we'll watch them fight to build one from scratch. Instead of standing on land where their enemies knew to fear them, they'll be standing on foreign soil where every handshake hides a dagger. And most importantly, instead of leaning on John, Jamie, or Casey for support, they'll have no one but each other. Episode 1 will be their trial by fire. Will they rise as the ultimate power couple, or will this be the beginning of their downfall? Sheridan won't give us the answer easily. But that's exactly what makes this story so irresistible. If episode 1 is about leaving Montana, then section 2 of this story has to be about what they're stepping into once that move becomes real. Because here's the truth. Sheridan never lets his characters escape their demons. He just relocates them into even darker storms. And for Beth and Rip, the move south doesn't mean safety. It means exposure. Montana gave them cover. John Dutton's name gave them armor. The ranch gave them purpose. But now, stripped of those protections, they're walking into a territory where their enemies won't hesitate and where alliances come at a cost too high to ignore. Episode 1 might end with the painful goodbye to Montana, but episode 2 and beyond will show the brutal consequences of starting over. And that seed is planted right in the premiere. One of the biggest questions fans are asking is why Texas? We know Sheridan owns sprawling land there, and production-wise, it makes sense. But story-wise, it raises so many possibilities. Texas is oil country. It's ranching country. It's politics, money, and ruthless power plays. Not so different from Montana, but scaled up in a way Beth and Rip haven't faced before. Montana was about holding on to legacy. Texas could be about building an empire from nothing, surrounded by rivals who already rule the land. And who better to test Beth's fire and Rip's loyalty than people who see them as nothing more than outsiders playing cowboy? Episode 1 doesn't need to show us the whole battlefield. It just needs to show us enough to know that Beth and Rip are already outnumbered. And this is where the casting becomes so crucial. Annette Bening's Bula Jackson is described as charming, but cunning. Charm in Sheridan's world is never innocent. It's always a weapon. That means episode 1 could introduce her in a way that instantly sets Beth on edge. Imagine Beth trying to carve out her space, only to realize that Bula has already been 2 steps ahead for decades. That alone sets up an explosive rivalry that fans will be glued to. And then there's Ed Harris's Everett McKini, the weathered veteran whose presence feels like a warning. Beth and Rip are strong, but Everett has survived long enough to know when strength isn't enough. His very existence suggests that in this new world, brute force won't win every battle. Episode 1 could hint that Everett sees through Rip's toughness, maybe even tests it in ways that make Rip question his own role. And when Rip is shaken, Beth's foundation shakes with him. But perhaps the most thrilling and terrifying possibility Episode 1 hints at is Beth's criminal past catching up to her. The Yellowstone finale left us with the image of Jamie gone, Beth victorious, and John's legacy left in ashes. But how long can that last without consequences? Casting calls about prisoners, law enforcement, and courtroom drama suggest the new spin-off isn't going to ignore Beth's actions. Sheridan is notorious for weaving in long consequences. He doesn't forget, even if the characters try to. If episode 1 shows Beth on the run, or at least aware that Montana is no longer safe for her, then leaving isn't a choice. It's survival. And if survival is the motive, then every single move Beth and Rip make in Texas is already poisoned by desperation. You can't build a new empire if the ghosts of your crimes are haunting every step you take. Now, let's not forget about Carter. He may not always be the center of attention, but his presence changes everything. In Montana, he was under John's shadow, shaped by the Dutton way of life. But in this sequel, Carter is under Rip and Beth alone. No backup, no Dutton Ranch safety net, just them. Episode 1 sets that tone. If they're leaving Montana, they're also leaving behind the only place Carter has ever known. How does a teenage boy react to being uprooted, thrown into a world that doesn't welcome him? This is where Sheridan can really twist the knife, because Carter is the one person Rip and Beth can't intimidate, can't fight, and can't manipulate. He's family now, which means episode 1 is also about showing Beth and Rip as parents, something we've never really seen before. And let's be honest, Beth as a mother is one of the most unpredictable, explosive ideas Sheridan has ever set up. Episode 1 might just tease it, but the cracks in that dynamic will shape the entire series. And then there's the baby rumor. Fans have speculated for months that Beth and Rip might try to expand their family, either through adoption or otherwise. Episode 1 is probably too early to dive into that fully, but the seeds might already be planted. A single line, a passing glance, even a quiet moment between Beth and Rip could foreshadow that storyline. And if Sheridan really wants to break us emotionally, he'll start hinting at it right away. Because Beth's infertility isn't just a backstory detail, it's her deepest wound. Bringing that wound into this new chapter only raises the stakes higher. Rip might dream of a bigger family. Beth might fear it. And episode 1 could quietly show that their greatest enemy isn't outside. They're carrying it inside their marriage. So as the first episode unfolds, every moment is layered with tension. Leaving Montana isn't just about packing up a ranch. It's about saying goodbye to a way of life, stepping into enemy territory, and dragging all your ghosts with you. Sheridan isn't promising peace here. He's promising fire. Episode 1 is his way of stripping Beth and Rip bare, showing us what they're made of when they have nothing left to lean on but each other. Will they rise, or will they finally break? That's the suspense that will keep fans glued to every second of this sequel. What makes this sequel so gripping is not just where Beth and Rip are going, but what they're leaving behind. Montana isn't just a location in Yellowstone, it's a character of its own. It's the land that shaped John Dutton's empire, the battlefield where every war was fought, the sacred ground that the family bled to protect. For Beth and Rip to walk away from that in episode 1 is bigger than a plot twist. It's a symbolic betrayal of everything they once stood for. And that's where the real drama lies, because even if they've left physically, Montana will haunt them emotionally. Episode 1 might show us those first quiet moments of separation, the empty valley fading into the distance, the realization that they can never go back. That's not just heartbreaking, it's dangerous, because people who carry regret often make reckless choices. And when it comes to Beth, recklessness is a weapon that can destroy her just as much as her enemies. The Montana question also ties into a larger debate among fans. Can Yellowstone even exist without Yellowstone? Can you remove the sprawling ranch, the dusty mountains, and the long shadows of cattle drives and still call it the same universe? Sheridan clearly thinks so. But episode 1 is going to be the test. If audiences buy into Beth and Rip's journey outside Montana, it will prove that the Yellowstone franchise isn't just tied to a place, it's tied to the people. And if they don't, then episode 1 risks feeling like a betrayal. Sheridan knows this, which is why he'll use episode 1 to pull no punches. He'll lean on Beth's fire, Rip's steel, and the weight of their love story to distract us from the fact that the scenery has changed. Because if we care about them more than the land, then the show survives. If we don't, then leaving Montana could be its undoing. That tension alone makes episode 1 one of the most high-stakes premieres Sheridan has ever written. And while we're talking about tension, let's not ignore the fact that episode 1 is also a clean slate. For years, Yellowstone has been about the Duttons tearing each other apart. John versus Jamie, Beth versus Jamie Casey caught in the middle, Rip enforcing order with his fists while John carried the weight of the family on his shoulders. But this sequel is stripped of all that noise. There's no John to give Beth guidance, no Jamie to be her punching bag, no Casey to balance the scales. It's just Beth and Rip on their own for the first time ever. Episode 1 will be the first glimpse of what their relationship looks like without the family drama drowning them. And that's terrifying, because their bond has always thrived in chaos. Without the constant wars, can they survive? Sheridan loves to test his characters where they're weakest, and Episode 1 might show us that Beth and Rip's greatest challenge isn't outside. It's inside their own marriage. The power dynamics in this new world will also be a big part of Episode 1. In Montana, Rip was feared. He was John Dutton's right hand, the man no one dared to cross. But outside that ranch, who is Rip Wheeler? Without the brand, without the weight of the Dutton name, he's just another rancher in a sea of ranchers. Episode 1 might show him confronting that painful truth. And Rip isn't a man who adapts easily. His strength has always been his loyalty, his brutality, his willingness to do the dirty work others couldn't. But when that no longer earns him respect, Rip might have to find a new way to prove himself, and that, in turn, could shake the foundation of his relationship with Beth. Because Beth needs Rip to be unbreakable. If he falters, even for a moment, she might see it as weakness. And Beth doesn't forgive weakness, not even in the man she loves. That's the kind of intimate, personal conflict that Episode 1 could plant quietly, only to let it explode later in the season. Then there's the haunting possibility of Beth's reckoning. Fans are already whispering about the idea that she could face prison time for her role in Jamie's disappearance. Casting calls about prisoners suggest this isn't just a rumor. It could very well be Sheridan's plan. If Episode 1 even hints at Beth being investigated, questioned, or cornered by law enforcement, then leaving Montana isn't just a choice, it's an escape. And that raises the stakes to another level, because you can't outrun justice forever. Imagine Episode 1 showing Beth trying to establish a new life, while the shadow of her past crimes follows her like a storm on the horizon. That kind of suspense doesn't just hook audiences, it chains them to the screen, desperate to see how far she'll go before everything crashes down. And let's not forget, Yellowstone has always been about legacy. John Dutton's obsession was holding on to the ranch for future generations. Beth and Rip, by leaving Montana, are rewriting that entire theme. Their legacy isn't tied to land anymore, it's tied to love, to Carter, to whatever family they manage to build in this hostile new world. Episode 1 is where that new theme begins. We'll see them trying to protect Carter, trying to shield their love from enemies, trying to create something that isn't cursed by the Dutton name. But Sheridan won't make it easy. Episode 1 will remind us that in Yellowstone, love is never enough. Every choice comes with blood, sacrifice, and consequences that no one can escape. Beth and Rip might think they're leaving Montana to find peace, but what they're really doing is opening the door to a war they can't yet imagine. If the first 3 sections of Beth and Rip's story are about leaving Montana and stepping into a new world, then Section 4 is about what that decision costs them. Because Yellowstone has always been a story about sacrifice. Sacrifice of land, of loyalty, of family, and even of one's own soul. In Episode 1 of the sequel, that theme comes roaring back. Beth and Rip didn't just leave Montana, they left behind everything that once gave them identity. And while they might think they're gaining freedom, Sheridan is far too clever to hand them peace without a price. Episode 1 could be the beginning of their unraveling, and the most devastating part is that it might come not from enemies, but from the cracks within themselves. Let's start with Beth, because she is the storm at the center of this spin-off. In Yellowstone, she thrived on war. Every day was a battle against market equities, against Jamie, against anyone who dared threaten her father's land. But now, without John, and without the Dutton Ranch, who is Beth? That's the terrifying question Episode 1 might begin to answer. A woman like Beth cannot exist without an enemy. Conflict is her lifeblood. If she doesn't find someone to fight, she will destroy herself. And that is where Bula Jackson, played by Annette, steps into the story.